This is the car that put the world on wheels. I'm standing in front of a 1914 Model T Ford, 100 years old this year. If you look at this vehicle, you see some of what made it so popular. It's a bit Spartan in terms of its appointments, certainly not luxurious, but very, very well built. Has vanadium steel, which is an alloy of steel, which makes it lighter but also strong. Sits very high off the ground, so it can deal with the terrible roads of the time. And it also was increasingly affordable. The lowest point, you could get one of these for less than $300. So this is the car that allowed average Americans to purchase an automobile. We're now standing in front of a 1959 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz, and this is a great example of the high water mark, if you will, of automobile styling in the United States. The designer was king in the post-war era. People had a lot of money, they wanted cars, and they wanted big cars. You see a lot of indications of the fascination with the jet age and so forth in this car, with the high tail fins and these tail lights which almost look like flames spewing out the back. Everything's almost overdone. If you look at the grille on this car, it actually goes beyond the front and wraps around the sides of the vehicles. It's also a great example of General Motors' way that it addressed customers. Ford, for years just built a Model T and that was it. General Motors took a different approach. They built a car for every purse, they said. So you'd start, theoretically your customer starts with a Chevrolet, which is your most affordable vehicle, and then they work their way up through a Buick, then an Oldsmobile, and then eventually get up to Cadillac. And that's still, I think, the method that a lot of car makers are following today. Car makers kept building in the United States the large cars. They experimented a couple of times with smaller vehicles, most notably in the early 1960s, as foreign companies like Volkswagen were coming in with small vehicles. The big three started building smaller cars, but they didn't stick to it. They went back to larger cars again. All of that doesn't really change until it comes to a grinding halt with the oil embargo crises of the 1970s. Chrysler suffered particularly badly. They had not built any smaller cars. They weren't building them in the early 70s. They just had these large vehicles like this Newport, so they had to go back to the drawing board and come up with this, the Dodge Omni. And this car is credited with saving the company from bankruptcy, or at least playing a large role in that. And indeed, it did help turn them around, so they're still around today. We're in the history business here at the museum, so we're always a little cautious about prognosticating about the future, but an interesting example of what the future might look like for American automobiles is in this car here, the Edison II. It was built for and won the X Prize competition a couple of years ago. That is a competition that required you to design a car that could carry 4 people and get 100 miles to the gallon. You look at this, and a lot of the work is done through getting rid of unnecessary materials in the car. It's very basic in its design. There's not any ornamentation really. It's also got a lot of sophisticated materials in it as well. There's a lot of aluminum in there, carbon fiber and so forth, strong materials that save weight. So we already see some of that in the way that the big three are building their cars today, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more of that in the years ahead. I think the Detroit 3 will survive in some form. They've been around for a long time. They're all, despite the difficulties they had in 2008, they've all come back very strong, I think, and they've learned some of their lessons, if you will. So I have faith that they will be around for many more years.